Streaming live on Facebook, recording 3, 2, 1. Hey, what's up, everybody? Pete Caliendo here. Thanks for joining us today in the U.S. and around the world. Today's guest, well, I'm going to tell you about him in a minute, but before I do, don't forget, one favor is all we ask. Subscribe to YouTube, 90-plus shows already there. This audio will go on the baseball podcast, which is baseballoutsidethebox.com. YouTube is Peter Caliendo. Go there, subscribe, and now you'll get all the updates on all our shows. So that's all we ask, really. A couple announcements before we begin. Mark Pro device, it's awesome. It's like a stimulator. It's perfect for pitching, for throwing, for injuries. Check it out, markpro.com. If you put Caliendo B as a link or as your code when you order it, you will get 10% off. So check that out. Also, kids are going to Cuba this December. If everything works out, so far so good. 15U team will head to Cuba. If you're interested in playing in Cuba or coaching, please let me know. Caliendo19@gmail.com. International competition at its best. It is outstanding. And we'll talk later about in the show about Caliendo Sports International teams traveling in the summer all over the world for baseball and cultural. We've got softball. We got all kinds of teams going in different sports. So we'll talk about that later. So right now, let me tell you about our guest. Well, he's smart. He's funny. He's articulate. He's a business guy. I guess he's an economics guy, but he's a big baseball person, obviously. College baseball. He's been in the game a long time. He actually a college coach at Lehman College, and he's been in the game a long time. He's the director and owner of a baseball school. I call it a baseball school. He calls it a baseball camp. Director of the Rising Star Baseball Camp. So let me welcome my good friend at Caliendo Sports, instructor. He's been with us around the world. He's awesome. We have the best instructors in the world, I believe. Let me welcome Darren Gurney. What's up, buddy?
Hey, Pete. Welcome from New York. Thanks for having me back. Now, if I put Caliendo B into my Amazon order tonight, will I get any kind of discount, you think, or no?
Yeah, you'll get a discount. They'll probably delete you from the account. You'll be deleted as soon as they see Caliendo on there. Yeah, but we've got, as a matter of fact, though, as you mentioned that, I noticed on our baseballoutsidethebox.com website, there's Amazon there. So if you order from Amazon off of our website, then we get, a certain percentage off some products.
Fantastic.
So you could do that. How's that? I'm glad you brought that up. How you doing? Hey, by the way, how you doing in your man cave?
It's a beautiful thing. I mean, this is survival mode. I've spent a lot of time down here, got a lot of baseball things accomplished in the last few months. Obviously, I'd like to be out and about, but when I'm not on the field coaching, I'm in my man cave. And I apologize. Last we spoke, I was in a dugout at a local school, really beautiful field, and we lost reception there. So now we're back here. We had lost power in New York for about 5-6 days, but we're back alive here.
Hey, by the way, to celebrate our Italian trip, I have my espresso. That's also to keep up with you. Full of espresso shot. And this is Italian coffee, not that junk from, other areas. Italians make the best coffee, just so everybody knows. Hey, so what have you been up to? I think that's something to talk about as far as, baseball, and I didn't give you enough credit, obviously. 28 years in the game, I believe. You've been in college baseball, high school, running your own camps. You've got a lot of online stuff. You've got books. I think you wrote, 4 or 5 books. There's all kinds of stuff that you've done in the game. With your kids and, with your teams, you got your college teams. What's been going on there? What have you done with those guys? Is there any like Zoom calls or things going on educationally?
Yeah, so unfortunately the NCAA shut us down in mid-March like they did for everyone. But we've been doing Zoom calls. A lot of my NCAA guys are sending me video of their workouts, and they want feedback in terms of mechanical analysis and so forth. I do a lot of virtual training now over Zooms, but also doing people's fundamentals. They send me footage and I'll break it down and send it back to them. And then they'll incorporate the changes I'm recommending into their delivery as a pitcher or their hitting mechanics as a batter and send it back to me. And so that's been a lot of what we've been doing. Recreational and travel ball still going on, and I'm doing coaching in that realm, which has been great to get out of the house. But the coronavirus protocols with the masks and social distancing, it's definitely a challenge. In my local area, I feel like the people have done a great job with sanitation, and being very mindful of all the safety measures we have to now abide by.
You know,
So that's kind of what I've been up to, Pete.
you know, and it's interesting because you were saying, you know, the virtual, you're always one step ahead of everybody. You're not just outside the box thinker, but you're also a step ahead because you got this virtual stuff going on. You know, and it's interesting. How does that work with a player as far as, and I'm sure it could be done with coaches or anybody else, even parents, because, you know, we're going to talk about this being a three-pronged educational system, especially at the younger levels. But how does the virtual part actually work?
So a player would need a bat and a batting tee and a net ideally, and they could set that up in their basement or in their backyard. If they're a pitcher, hopefully they can get to a pitching mound, and we'll be doing live training virtually, as they call it. And it's been a lot of fun, and a lot of the players like it. The parents who are very concerned about COVID-19 have really taken to this, and the kids got used to this, Pete, all spring, being on Zoom and Google Meet phone calls with their teachers. So this is kind of an extension of that, although now we're doing physical kinesthetic learning rather than just the traditional classroom stuff. And then, of course, with the video analysis, a lot of people like this because they can do 5, 10, 15 takes of their swing, send me the one they want me to analyze, and then I'll pair them up either with a major leaguer that has their body type or with their previous swing from 3 months, 6 months, a year ago to see the improvements they've made. So a lot of people who are into video and technology enjoy this aspect while also being safe from the virus.
You know, as we mentioned virtual, I was thinking, you know, there's also virtual reality. I haven't had anybody yet on the show. I'm going to, because I've had other people talk about virtual reality and they're saying from a visual standpoint, it's not what people think it is, but I want to get those guys on to talk about it. This whole game and this whole training is becoming virtual if you think about it. Not only, I had Eric Kaplan who was on when we talked about statistics and, you know, different ways to measure things. I mean, everything's becoming virtual if you think about it.
Yeah, in baseball, we now do vision training, and with hit tracks and Rapsodo and Modus, there's so many different technologies that enable us to see our flaws and our inefficiencies. And then we have all of this high technology to improve it, to kind of maximize our output. No different than any kind of science or office setting where we're trying to maximize our productivity.
Yeah, I got to believe that from the technologies, you know, that I've seen, you know, in the old days, we didn't have that. So we, you know, we had to kind of guess, but in some ways, you know, making an educated guess and what the player was doing. We could slow it down later on with some video, but really, you know, fast video. We didn't have the real slow stuff. Now you can almost confirm pretty good that this is the movement that's incorrect and we need to correct this movement or whatever it may be.
Yeah, it's amazing how far we've come. I just had my 80-year-old father over, and we were talking about how much training has changed since he was a kid when it was see ball, hit ball. And the players were expected to just go out and play and be good. At most, someone might yell out some verbal directive like, oh, you're not finishing as a pitcher or as a hitter, back elbow, this or that. Now everything is so broken down, and we have all this lingo. And you know, I was reflecting while coaching a game the other night, 4 different people were yelling out mechanical things to the kid in the box. He swung and missed at the first pitch. And then there's someone saying, oh, you got to twist your back leg. And then there's someone saying top hand's got to stay on the bat. And someone saying your front shoulder's coming out. So we have to also be careful, Pete, not to overload, especially young players, but players of all ages with too much information. Because then it's overwhelming, especially in a game setting where a lot of times you just kind of want to get in that zone and react. Maybe when you're training or at practice, you want to work on those fundamentals. But in a game setting, when everyone's yelling out all of these mechanical cues, it's tough to take it all in.
Man, it is amazing that still as of today, and I want to be critical because I make a lot of mistakes, whether it be a coach, a parent, made a ton and still do. But as of today, still parents or people in the stands who are trying to coach during the game. So, and I can't believe, you know, even coaches that have some education should understand that if you're over coaching in the game, it's just too mind boggling. Put yourself in that position of that 11-year-old, 12-year-old trying to throw. I mean, take the skill of pitching. ball's too big for their hand. Their body's not coordinated yet. They're trying to throw over a 17-inch plate, a 2-foot strike zone, which is small. And you're doing it under a lot of pressure and you certainly don't need all these people yelling. And I guess I'm saying all this because I think it's so important to educate. And I mentioned it, 3 people, the players, the coaches, and the parents. If they're not on the same page, the long-term development of a player is going to be reduced. And I say that, and I want to get your opinion, because you as a coach, if I got an 11-year-old, okay, I'm working with my team and everything, well, they're going to go home. And mom and dad are going to talk to them at home, right? So they've got them more than we do. And, eventually they're going to listen to their parents if there's a problem. That's why I think educating everybody on the same thing, understanding how to teach and how to coach is so important. What's your opinion on that?
That triangle with the child at the top and then the coach and the parent at the bottom of the triangle is crucial. And that's why I think as a coach, it's so important to have a parent meeting, whether you're coaching youth baseball, high school baseball. At the college level, we don't really have parent meetings, although we might have a fun alumni day and parents come and you get to know them, but there's definitely more distance with parents at the college level, thankfully, on my end. But
hopefully that doesn't change.
Yeah, and it's really important because as a parent, you want to know that the coach has your child's best interest at heart, both his health, his emotional well-being, and obviously his baseball development. So it's a really important component, that communication. And that's why I think it's crucial to have a parent meeting early on, whether you're coaching a high school team or you're coaching a youth team. So everyone knows the expectations and you set up what you think are the acceptable communication pathways during the season. Is it email? Is it phone call? Can it be about playing time? What can we communicate about? So it's very important, Pete.
I love that you brought up the parent meeting because I think that is so critical for our younger coaches. I don't care if you got travel teams, in-house teams, whatever it may be, prior to the season, setting those expectations so that way everybody's clear on them. Now, you mentioned some. What do you think are the most important expectations? I'm going to give you mine. I want you to give me yours as far as if you agree with this one particular one. I find this to be the most important one of the most important ones. And that is understanding that the player is responsible for their ability to get better at their skills. The coach is there to give them the information and guide them along the best way possible. But ultimately, it's the player's responsibility to get better, and the parent can be a part of that process. And I say that because baseball is such a skilled sport that it's like the piano. You got to practice it all the time. If you want to be a better fielder, you got to take some ground balls when nobody's around. Well, the parent can help with that. If you want to, be a little better hitter, you're going to have to swing the bat at least every day, even if it's 10, 20 times a day. You're going to have to do something. And I say, as a volunteer, I can't be responsible totally for the development of your son's, skills and which relate to the game, because the parent then looks at the game and says, well, they're not doing so well. That must be the coach's fault. Well, no, it's not, because is the player practicing extra on their own? Is the parent helping in that process? I know it's long-winded, but I think it's important for young coaches and parents to understand that. Am I going wrong there?
No, I think you're right on target. A lot of it depends on the age we're talking about as well. A varsity player who's a junior or senior at his high school, the high school coach definitely needs to set up ground rules. How are we going to communicate? Can the parent drop off a Gatorade in the dugout in the middle of a game? Should the parent wait 24 hours if they want to talk about something that occurred in the game? Playing time becomes such a hot button issue for parents. Or is my child playing the ideal position that he's going to play in college? And then the other piece, and I've talked about this a lot with a number of different people in recent months, and that is the training facility where the parent's paying $120 an hour to have their child trained is telling the parent, hey, my son's your son's a Division I catcher. He's got this or that metrics on the data. And then the high school coach sees it differently, and it really can cause a rub, because the parent is spending the money, and the facility wants to stay in business. So they're going to say generally positive things about his development and his ability to play at the next level. And that doesn't necessarily take into account what the high school coach is seeing regarding in-game performance and then the competition within that roster. Maybe there's another catcher who handles the staff better, has a better pop time, blocks better, runs the defense more effectively. So that's at the high school level. I think at the youth level, it's definitely going to be a little more parent involvement. Just parents are not ready to let go as much, and that's natural. So I think coaches have to be sensitive to that. That doesn't mean the parents should be in the dugout with the kids and interfering and yelling out different directives, but there's going to be more communication, not to mention the parents are the ones driving the kid to and from practice and game. So you're going to have more parent involvement at the youth level. And I think it's important to be sensitive that I'm here to educate your child, teach him the right way to play the game. We have to communicate about safety and his health, the health of his body, while we also work on development.
Great points. Love it. And I agree 100%. And I was relating probably what I talked about more to the younger levels, from the simple fact that I think you mentioned, parents that are talking a lot in the stands. And I know what I used to do is, educate the parents, and then you could talk to them, but a lot of times they're not listening all the time. But what I used to do is send them articles, vision articles, that Dr. Harrison had wrote in the 70s, that when a parent is talking out loud during the game, the son or daughter, they can recognize that voice. And all of a sudden, it blanks out the ability for them to concentrate on what they're trying to do on the field. Well, instead of me telling them that, I'd send them the scientific evidence behind it. And my question would only be to the parents. I know you care about your kids. That's why you're trying to help them during the game. But read this, because this actually will explain to you that you're actually hurting them more than helping them. So things like that at parent meetings, I just think those are things to clear out early on.
Yeah, the pressure of a parent yelling in the stands can really make a child not enjoy being a baseball player. And parents better be aware of that. Mike Matheny, the former Cardinals manager, if your viewers want to Google this, he wrote a great letter to parents, and it was of a youth team, explaining what his expectations were and what his goals were for the season. And it was really powerful for the parents to recognize all the different components that he envisioned for the season. And you got to lay it out for them. What I always do with parents is, hey, this is what it looks like to be a good fan at the game. This is what it sounds like. And why do we do this? And usually at our early season meeting, they're 100% on board. But then as things progress, sometimes their competitive nature takes over. And I think it's hard. Whoa, I've spent $2,300 in the off season on lessons for little Johnny and his strength training program. And we went to doctors about his growth plate, yada, yada, yada. So all of a sudden, they're fired up, and they've forgotten a month and a half after our meeting, they've forgotten about what we went over and they agreed to, and they signed a contract about how they would behave and how they would communicate. So you sometimes have to revisit that mid or end of season.
Yeah, I think the other aspect, and this, you're a parent. I saw it when I stepped out a little bit. It's tough to watch your kids out in the field if they're not doing well, especially when they're young. It's really hard to sit there and say nothing. I get that part. I understand it. But, it's important for the long-term development of players. Our goal as coaches should be to help them as best possible, make sure they're having some fun. So that way that, they're successful, because if they're successful at certain things, whether it be, fielding a ground ball or hitting or base running, there's many ways to be successful. If they're successful, they got a chance to go on to higher levels. And I say higher, progress to the next level. And that's what I want to talk about, because it all starts at the young level. It starts when they're really young. In the U.S., we start with T-ball. I get it. I started with T-ball also, and I'm sure it was a good thing for a while, and I'm not a big fan of it, and I could tell you why in a little bit. But, what do you think some of the things are important when you're first starting off playing baseball? What age should you start? What are some of the things the coaches should be doing with them? Because if you try to play a regular game or try to play a T-ball game, you're you're going to go nuts, and the kids aren't going to have that much fun, in my opinion.
So use the word fun. It's crucial. If we're not having fun in baseball, we miss the point of it. I believe it was Chris Chambliss who said that. So
Was that
at
after he
age,
hit the home run?
I think it was way after when he was reflecting on his career.
That's right.
So I would say age 4 and 5, you can introduce baseball to players in a group setting, but I would limit it to 1 hour. And we have a young prospects program at my baseball camp where 4 and 5-year-olds are welcome to come, but we limit it typically to 1 hour. We did expand the 5-year-old program to 3 hours, but a lot of that's going to be, can the kid focus and pay attention? Because they're holding weapons. A bat and a baseball are weapons, and if they're not focused and they're not mature enough to handle that, and they can't concentrate for more than an hour, I would leave it at that level. Once you get to 6, 7, 8, I find that players can focus for 5 to 6 hours, especially if they've had a good introduction to the game and they're passionate about learning. So fun is crucial. I think it's very important to be positive. I always tell my coaches, hey, 5 positive comments for every 1 constructive criticism. And I expect that out of youth coaches. When I hold coaches clinics, I always tell the young coaches, hey, try to give 5 compliments for every 1 criticism. And I know it's hard because the kids are learning the game. They're making mistakes. They're not paying attention. They're running through a pitcher who's warming up in between innings. They fire a ball in from center field that almost hits the shortstop in the head when they say ball's in, coming down. But you got to be positive, really. And I think that, by the way, applies even as the players get older, to be complimentary as much as possible. I mean, I coached my son's team. We opened up 0-8, Pete, and we were truly the Bad News Bears. The name of our team was the Buttermakers, which is a reference to the Bad News Bears.
Yes.
And there were a few players on the team that had played previously, but a lot of them were unskilled and new to it. And I made it my business in our post-game chats to always throw out 5 positives. First thing, whether we lost 12-2 or 4-3, 5 positives, and then I'm going to go around and maybe make some suggestions for critical things to improve upon individually. So it's got to be fun. It's got to be educational. And you know I'm a big safety guy, Pete. And I wrote a book, Heads Up. It's all about 50 safety things to be aware of when you're playing baseball, such as when you're having a catch, make sure there's no one behind you. When you're warming up with a bat, make sure there's no one within 10 feet of you. And so safety's got to be the key. And then, yeah, development. How are we going to work on development? I believe it comes back to fundamentals, because whatever you teach a player at a young age, that becomes ingrained. And I don't know if you're familiar with Malcolm Gladwell. He wrote a book called Outliers, and it's about 10,000 repetitions. And if you teach proper mechanics and the player works on those for 10,000 repetitions, he'll get it. But if he's practicing wrong, whether it be throwing, hitting, fielding, he's going to be creating muscle memory. And we know that practice becomes permanent. He might have muscle memory of incorrect fundamentals. So it's crucial that we teach proper mechanics.
Love it. And that was my point earlier about, hey, you got to spend some time on your own, because sometimes, some teams only practice twice a week, some once a week. It just depends on the teams and the levels. So that's why I mentioned doing some work on your own. And also, interesting, something that why players possibly think the game's not fun and also may drop out is a big word, fear. Fear of the ball, fear of, getting hit, fear of a bad hop, hitting in their face. Where do you start when it comes to trying to eliminate that fear? Because if you can eliminate that fear, I got a better chance to work on my skills. And the better skills I have, the better chance I have of not getting hit by the ball. Where do you start? Because fear is a big problem. I mean, that's the reason, think about it. You go play soccer, go play hockey, you got pads on. You get hit by a baseball, that hurts a lot. And a lot of young kids, once they get hit, they don't want to play it anymore.
Yeah, while I'm on the safety topic with fear, I recommend that the players wear these heart guards, and they now sell these hats that you can insert Kevlar. Masahiro Tanaka of the Yankees, who got hit by a line drive right in their early season training, now has a Kevlar insert in his hat. So if parents are concerned about their child getting hurt, those are some things you can do. Obviously, there's a lot of arm and leg guards that you see the professionals wearing and so forth. What I do with my guys as hitters is I'll actually hit them with tennis balls while they're batting, and I'll teach them how to get out of the way, how to turn and get the bat down. And then we progress to a more safety soft baseball, ultimately till we use hard balls. And they see that, hey, it's not the end of the world. If I get hit with the ball in the chest fielding at shortstop, if I get hit in the arm by a fastball when I'm batting, if I get hit by a comebacker, I'm going to be okay. Now, obviously, there are some tragic cases and so forth. And that's why, as coaches, we have to do drills to teach players how to play the game safely. We do a now drill where the pitcher will be facing the second base bag. I'll say now, and then I'll hit a ball at him, and he's got to quickly react. Or we'll start him on his knees, and he's got to stand up and field the ball. We make sure all our pitchers finish in a good athletic fielding position when they deliver the baseball. Same thing with the batters. Can you see the ball with both eyes? How is your vision? Are you adept at getting out of the way of an inside fastball? How do you do that? So we actually practice for that. And then ultimately, Pete, you hope that players see if they do get hit in the shin with a one hopper, if an outfielder misses a ball in the sun and it hits him in the clavicle, is he okay? Yes. It might hurt for a little bit. And then, some kids are just more resilient to it than others, and they're more passionate about learning the game, and they're willing to take a hit. I had a kid, Anthony, 2 years ago. I was coaching him. I felt terrible. I hit him a ball in the outfield. It popped up, hit him in the teeth and tongue area, and he had a cut on his tongue, and he had to go home. I said, no hot chicken wings for you. And he came out the next day like nothing happened. And that's why kids like that, they develop because they're so hungry to get better.
Sure.
So it's not for everyone. I mean, that's the other thing. I mean, you mentioned T-ball. Think about how many kids get weeded out between ages 4 and 8 in baseball. And then obviously from age 8 to 13. But a lot of it is some kids don't like the pace of baseball. It moves too slowly. There's a little more standing around than a game like lacrosse where they can run around and hit people. And, I'm not a big fan of lacrosse. So if you're listening and you're a lacrosse person, no offense, but baseball is a thinking man's game. I got to stand in right field and say, hey, what's going to happen if the ball's hit to me? And what in the air, on the ground, what am I going to do with it? If I'm on the dugout, no, that's not boring. I'm watching the pitcher's release point. What kind of pitches does he throw? What's his pickoff move like? So it's a thinking man's game, and it's not for everyone. It's a little slower paced. And if I'm someone who can't focus for long periods of time, maybe I should play a different sport.
Good point. I mean, not all sports are for everybody. And talking about long term, and I'm trying to address this really to our young kids to understand, because I think we need to try to keep our young kids in the game a little longer. And you mentioned the things that maybe they're not very interested in. That is, the pace is too slow, the field's too big, possibly too many guys on the field at 8 years old.
Sure.
That's why I love the concept of a smaller field. Hockey went to it. It went to a smaller arena, smaller field, less players. You could be a 5-on-5 game when you're 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 years old.
Yeah.
Doesn't have to be 9-on-9. I have here, a bigger bat barrel, right?
Yeah.
And this thing is light as a feather. When you have 6-year-olds with a big barrel and you have a big ball and the ball doesn't go very far and you only have 5 players in defense, everybody's going to be involved. So my point to this is always, in my opinion, trying to figure out ways to make the game exciting, keep them in the game longer, and continue to play the game. And later on, they may change their mind and not want to play, but continue the game to play longer and play as long as possible. One of those things is, I guess I was going to ask you what you think the success, when you talk about success of a player, what does that really mean success-wise? Coach, you there? I think we lost Coach. I think he needs to pay his internet bill. Coach Gurney, you there? Hello.
I lost you for a little bit there, Pete.
Yeah,
I lost you there for a little bit.
Did your power go out?
My power's fine. I was going to ask, is
Folks,
that a bat or a giant Italian salami?
Hey, I'm wondering what's going on in the East Coast because, nothing works out there. I'm not sure I'm ever going to move there. I'm staying here in the Midwest or maybe head south.
Well, you know how it is. These power companies, there's only one of them. They got a monopoly. They got no incentive to fix things. I'm paying my bill this month, and I got nowhere else to go for my business. So it's hard.
I think Coach Gurney's trying to get me to edit more and spend more time on something I have no idea how to do. So I'm gonna have to edit part of that. But that's all right. We love him, and we're gonna continue to talk to him. If it happens one more time, he's out and he's never allowed to come back again.
Oh, goes down looking. I can't handle that. That'll destroy me, Pete. But I
Listen,
would
I'm
like
not
to
sure.
address. I'd like to address what you asked. You know, I think.
Oh, you
two
actually
things.
heard it? You did hear
Oh,
it?
come on. I
Oh, I
can
didn't.
hear you without the phone. You're so loud. I can hear you all the way from Chicago to New York.
No, but I thought
Um,
you froze up. You did hear what I said.
yeah, you were talking
Okay.
a little bit about how to keep it interesting, the smaller field and so forth. I'm a big fan of integrating technology. So you bring an iPad to the field, you film a child's at bat, even if he's 6 years old, and then you have a coach go through it. So you have a technology coach in the dugout. So he bats, he then goes to the dugout. Normally, he'd have to wait 8 more batters to hit again. But no, he's going to work with a technology coach on watching his swing, and he gets a big kick out of it. And you can email him the video footage as well. I also have one coach that in between pitches, and we're talking at the youth level, he's either throwing or hitting balls to the defense. So that kid who's standing in the outfield not getting any action, he's going to get reps in between.
Great stuff.
Yeah, no, you got it. You know, you talk about a smaller field. I've also talked maybe about a bigger field where they got to use a cutoff man. So the third baseman at age 4 has to throw the ball not to first base, but to another teammate who then throws it to first base, just to get more kids involved. And obviously, there's a lot of moving parts, and their focus is a big piece to the puzzle. But there are a lot of ways to make baseball more active where there's not as much standing around, and we don't want to lose these kids to sports like lacrosse and soccer where they're all running around and staying busy, but not necessarily doing that much.
Correct. I agree. What about what do you think? What's fun? When you say fun, what does that really mean? How do you get a player to stay in the game longer? Because you know what's the work you do behind that?
So I do a lot of competitions at practice where I'll give away prizes. In addition, I think you can have even in-game competitions, like whoever has the best hustle play, whoever makes the best defensive play, and I'll give away baseball cards. I'll give away a hat. I'll give away a Big League Chew or a Gatorade. And I think I've talked to you about this previously. If we're in a batting cage situation, I'll hang up a $5 bill in the cage, and if you hit the end of the cage, you get to keep the $5 bill, or hang up a T-shirt.
Wow,
And
you're
the
doing
kid,
well.
oh yeah, Petey. Yeah, I mean, this is New York. It's a high standard of living. Our customers expect that kind of affluence in the training as well. But bottom line is, you've got to build in fun competitions, even if it's little candy things. Even with my college guys, I'll do that. On a bus ride, I might ask a bunch of questions. Hey, can anyone tell me, the 9 ways to get to first base? Can anyone tell me the infield fly rule? Can anyone tell me the rule behind the drop third strike? Even with college guys, make them verbalize that. And I'll give out, a Big League Chew. I'll give out, a different kind of candy or a hat or a T-shirt just to keep it fun. And then obviously we're doing that with physical competition as well.
Then what do you see? There's no doubt about it. Players are going to drop out at a certain point from a sport. I get that. There's a certain time they just want to maybe go to another sport. Maybe they're concentrating on something at school or a girlfriend, whatever it may be. But what do you see as coaches, some of the things that possibly we are doing to really disincentivize kids to continue to play the game?
I think too many coaches are encouraging sports specialization, and there's mental burnout. So when you and I grew up, Pete, take the top athlete, the Mike Trout. He would play football for 3 months. He would then play basketball for 3 months. He would then play baseball for 3 months. And then his summer, he might do a little bit of all of that. So the bottom line is we don't do that anymore. Kids start specializing at a very young age. They train in the winter for baseball at facilities or with their travel team. They play on their school team in the spring. They play summer ball, and then they do their fall baseball. there's no time off. That creates mental burnout. And also you get overuse injuries, and there's just physical ailments that occur when you play only one sport. Running out of the batter's box in baseball puts certain strain on the hamstrings and the quads and the calves that if we only did that 3 to 5 months, might not cause as many injuries if we did that and then integrated basketball or soccer or wrestling or swimming throughout the year. So there's too much sports specialization, and that, I believe, is causing burnout. I want my players, especially if I'm a high school coach, I want them playing in a 14-7 football game where they're in a pressurized situation. I want them at the foul line in a 68-67 basketball game, trying to like tie the game up and give the team the win. They're in a pressure situation. They're getting away from baseball, and they're utilizing other muscles, which increases their athleticism, their fast twitch muscle fiber, etc. So I think that's really important. The problem, Pete, and let's come back to money and capitalism for a moment, because you mentioned I have an economics background. The problem is the travel coach is, and his program has an economic incentive to get the kids playing 6 to 9 months. Instead of collecting $1,500, now he's collecting $4,500. And the training facility that's charging $80, $100, $120 an hour, depending on where you live and the cost of living there, he's going to encourage the kid to come in for lessons once or twice a week, 6, 9, 12 months a year. So because of that, you're getting this. That's where the sports specialization's coming. I don't think it's coming as much from the high school. I think it's coming from the business end, the people with businesses running these travel programs and the training facilities.
Yeah, good. Okay, so the question would be, what's the solution? Because if we're playing all year round, you just mentioned things that are detrimental, and there's more to that. I'm sure we could have a whole show almost on that. What's the solution? If you're a travel team owner, because you might have 6, 7, 9 teams, and what would you recommend to somebody who's starting off? You know, where do you start? How do you keep it to the point where the benefit is also with the player that's going to play long term? Because I could tell you this, I don't need statistics. I know travel teams that started 15 years ago who played 80, 90 games, and I've tracked some of the players. They've gone nowhere. You know, they haven't played past high school, a lot of them. So what's the solution?
It's going to be hard to tell a travel program owner, hey, do less. You'll make less money, but it's good for the kids. It's got to come from educating the parents and the players. And don't get me wrong, some of the travel programs are run by really good people, and they know, hey, why don't you just do 4 months or 6 months with me? But there's a good portion of them that they're looking at their bottom line. They're paying big rent. They have overhead with coaches and labor and insurances and everything else. So it's going to be hard to convince them to tell the kids not to specialize. And that's not just in baseball, Pete. That's with soccer and AAU basketball. It's not just a baseball problem. But I think all coaches see the value in playing multiple sports. The kids would benefit, and hopefully the parents will take the bull by the horns with us. The problem for a parent is they feel their kid's falling behind. And if he doesn't train in the off season and he doesn't do baseball 9 months, all these other kids are going to pass him by, and he won't make the high school team, or he won't get that college scholarship. So it's a tough predicament. And like I said, it's not just in baseball. It's in a variety of sports.
Yeah,
I think swimming.
Yeah, and I think sometimes parents might think, that if you're playing that single sport, it might be, they're thinking about Tiger Woods, he maybe possibly only played golf, but Tiger Woods was a great athlete. He played many sports when he was young.
Yeah.
I know I've seen research of, and I may be off a little bit, but more than 95% of major league players were all multi-sport athletes.
Sure.
So if you want to look at the long picture, you hit it on a button. That's multi-sport athletes. The other area that we've talked about on a show before, and again, with us traveling worldwide, and I've done a lot of work with countries such as Japan, Cuba, and some others, one thing I think we're lacking, but yet there are some travel teams doing this, which these are the good ones, I believe. They're practicing more than they're playing. Now, I'm not saying if they play 80 games, I don't care the number of games. As long as the kids enjoy it, I guess, as long as they're coming back. Someone told me, if they love coming back and playing, let them play. But the key is, are you practicing more than you're playing? You know, people say, well, the Cubans, they play a lot of games. Yeah, but they practice twice as much as they play. The Japanese practice way more than they play. These are pretty successful countries with a lot less players than we have in the U.S. So what's your thought on that?
So I'm really happy you raised that question, because what's easier, running a practice or coaching a game in the third base box?
Coaching a
I
game.
mean, right. So if I've got 15, 18 players at a practice and I'm by myself, or I have one assistant coach, that's a lot, Pete. But if I'm at a game and I'm in the third base box and my assistant coach is in the first base box, it's not a lot. So that tells you incentive-wise while they play a lot of games. But they really should be practicing. Look at any high school or college team. They're going to practice 3 or 4 times the amount that they play. And one of my beefs with travel programs, and it's not all of them, and there's some great guys out there. In my area, there's a few that come to mind who run really good travel programs. But too often, they don't practice at all. They play 4 or 5 games a week. After the game, they pack up, they go home. There's no debrief. They don't go to the outfield and speak for 15 minutes about what was done right, what was done wrong. There's no video analysis of the player's swings or pitching deliveries. So that has to be a focus. Are we teaching? And too often, it's not. It's we play the games, we go home. We have really nice gear. We play at magnificent fields and stadiums. But are we teaching the players? Are we showing them video of their fundamentals? And if the answer is no, we're not doing them right. And if I'm a parent signing my kid up, I'm going to ask those questions. How often does the team practice? Are you using any technology? Because, a lot of them have these Rapsodo and HitTrax machines, but they're just collecting cobwebs at their facility. And even if they do have them, they don't know how to use them. Okay, you told me my exit velo is 88 and my launch angle is 16 degrees. Well, now what? Unless you're going to educate me what to do with that, that's useless. So not enough teams practice. Other than high school teams, they have a limited schedule of games, and a lot of times they get rained out and they don't make them up. So they're practicing a lot. Same thing at the college level, especially, in the off season. So that would be one of my beefs. We're not practicing enough, and we're not teaching proper fundamentals enough at those practices or even from the post-game discussions.
I love you said that, and I'll tell you why. Because, when they're not practicing enough the right skills, that's where the fear comes in. I'm talking about young kids, because as I said, if they feel comfortable with their body and how they're handling their body, they're going to be less fearful of that baseball because they know how to control their body. And the other part is, there's no doubt about it. There's been enough studies on this. I don't think you needed studies, but the number one reason that young kids drop out of baseball, especially, I'm using baseball as an example, is they don't like the coach. 2, and it's big, is what you just mentioned, and that is practice is no fun. And that comes down to, and I think that's an important factor to talk about, because that comes down to educating our volunteers. And if you're a travel coach, you might be an ex-professional. That's fine. You may be pretty good, but also, how many practices have you run with the young kids? There's a difference between running a 12-year-old practice and running a college practice. Difference between having so much equipment and having no equipment. So if a person doesn't know how to run a fun, productive practice, they're going to get bored. The kid's going to get bored. And guess what? Why would they return?
Yeah, and too often, Pete, the practice is just repetitions. Batting practice, ground balls, fly balls. We need more than that at a practice. We have to go on, how do we handle a drop third strike with a man on third and 1 out? How do we handle infield in, got to cut the runner down? How do we handle double cuts from the outfield on a gapper that gets to the fence? So, and we got to handle pitchers backing up bases, and when and where, and how do we do it? If that stuff isn't practiced, teams aren't going to play well. And in addition, the other thing is, if we don't have an organized throwing program that we institute at practice, you can't institute that at a game, you're going to have more injuries. You're going to have arm injuries. You also want players to develop secondary and tertiary positions, because I might think I'm a shortstop and I'm going to play at the next level at shortstop, but you know what? Maybe I got to become a second baseman or a right fielder. And if I don't practice that and I only show up at games and play shortstop, I'm going to be limited when I do get to that high school team and there's a stud shortstop that's 2 years older than me. And at best, I could carry his bags. So I better be ready to play second base or outfield. And that's where practice comes in huge.
Darren, the other thing we talked about was the fear, and I'm with you on the multi-positions. We talked about that the other day on a show. I would have never played college baseball if it wasn't for my understanding how to play more positions. You and I have got a lot of experience in Japan. The Japanese kids can play any position. Why? Because they're fundamentally sound. Then they'll learn the particulars of that position. But because they can throw and play catch real well and field real well, they can play any position. So I'm with you on that. I think that's awesome. What other areas would you say when it comes to the long-term development of a player? Okay.
Yeah, so I can tell you as a college coach, athleticism is gigantic. So if you're looking at two high school players, let's say they're 16 years old, and one is nimble, fluid, moves gracefully, that's the kid that I'm going to go after. Let's say they're both equal in their data metrics.
Mm-hmm.
They both have an exit velo of 92. They both throw 85 miles an hour. They both run a 7.160. Let's just use those numbers. The kid that has more fast twitch muscle fiber, he's more graceful. That's the kid that's going to be higher ceiling and going to get recruited for me and for most college coaches. So how do you foster that stuff? Well, there is athletic development training programs. Players are doing yoga. They're doing Pilates. They're doing all sorts of new kinds of things to foster fast twitch muscle fiber and build athletic development. And it's crucial. Now, look, some of us are just more athletic than others, right? And that's a fact of life. But we can all try to harvest our athleticism. And that's where, by the way, playing multiple sports does help. I mean, if I'm playing soccer and I'm playing basketball and I'm playing baseball, I'm going to be more athletic when I'm running after a fly ball as a center fielder, because I've been basically putting a lot of effort into being more athletic in those other sports. So that's crucial. The other thing I want to talk about, Pete, you mentioned the Japanese. There's a selflessness there. You can't be too me. I'm the shortstop. I'm batting in the 3-hole. You got to be willing to say, you know what? I'm going to play right field today, or I'm going to try catching. Even though I don't want to wear the gear on a hot day, I want to learn that position. It makes me more versatile, and ultimately it does make you see the game from a different perspective, which makes baseball so much fun. Being able to play right field, play catcher, play shortstop, and see all the different angles and perspectives on the game. So I think all of that's part of that athletic picture too.
You mentioned selflessness. As we get into travel ball here, and I want to get into the showcases also a little bit. We get into travel ball, the thing that started was basically, someone's son or daughter wasn't playing enough, so they started their travel team. And then that team, somebody else wasn't playing, another travel team started. And it started to dilute the levels of travel. So they had to go to A and then B and C. And I don't even know if they might even be down to E for all I know. What's your thoughts on that? Is there a spot for all these players? Because, kids develop, and within 3 months, a kid can change fast, as far as body types and skills. Is there a place for all this, or are we heading in the wrong direction?
So travel baseball has evolved tremendously since the 1980s. I mean, in 1980, a true travel team would have 2 kids from one town, 2 kids from the next town over, maybe 1 kid from the town over from that. So it was a county-wide travel team. It was the best 15 kids in that county, and they were pretty darn talented. Now travel ball is kind of like the old recreation ball. Anyone who's got a checkbook can play travel baseball. And you're right, they are classified as A, B, C teams and so forth. And what it is good is sometimes a B team needs to play that A team to see why they're not at that level. Because they might have rattled off, 5 wins in a row against 4 B teams and 1 C team, and they need to lose 12-2 to an A team just to kind of get a little taste of reality. So, a lot of it does come back to money though, Pete, because a lot of these organizations, they're not going to turn away players. So they'll find a place to put them, whether it's the A, the B, or the C team. Yes, a lot of it started with parents being unhappy with their child's playing time or that specific program that they were part of. But now it's less parent run and more financially driven, where those facilities have two 12U teams, two 13U teams, and so on up the line to 18U. And you were talking about quality coaching. Just because someone was a good baseball player doesn't mean that they're a good educator or coach. And that's the problem for these travel programs, Pete. If I own a facility and I have two teams at each age group from 12 to 18, that's 14 teams. What are the odds that I can man that many coaches? I'm going to have 14 quality or 18, 20 quality coaches? Doubtful you're going to be able to have that. And if you can, you're going to have to pay them a lot of money because they're probably high school or college coaches during the springtime. And that's the challenge. And that's why a lot of these programs die off, because they had a great reputation when they were small and there were only 3 or 4 teams. Then they grew to 10 and it was still decent. Then they grew to 18 different teams, and now it's really watered down and the coaching product is just not there.
And I want to jump to that coaching aspect because, man, there's so much to dive into this. High school coaches, college coaches, they're educated when it comes to teaching. I'm not saying that, a lot of people are educated in general, but when it comes to teaching, they're certified. They've gone through courses. They've had to pass tests. Now, as this was always been my pet peeve, and that is coaches' education. I want to give a shout out to USA Baseball because the last 2 years they've done a pretty good job offering free education to coaches. But
Yeah.
I think we need to take a step further in that, and that is certification. And you know what? If you're a volunteer, unfortunately, we got to make sure we're getting the right volunteers and making sure that they're educating. Because I could send my 10-year-old kid to the grammar school, and that person that's teaching them's got to be educated. But I could send them to a travel team that has them all year round, as you just mentioned, yet they don't have to have any education or certification, which I think that's a big mistake we're making. So I bring that up because I believe coaches' certification, coaches' education is critical at the young ages.
Yeah, and I think it's important to have a coaching exam. What does that mean? What does that look like? I think there should be some safety questions, like I mentioned previously. There should be some basic baseball questions to make sure the coach is competent in knowing the rules of the game. And then there should be some practice oriented. How would you set up a practice? What would it look like? What's your dynamic or active warm-up? How do you teach base running? So I agree wholeheartedly. The problem, and I do a lot of seminars for local little leagues and youth leagues around here, Pete. The problem is they say to me, Coach Gurney, we can't get enough volunteers. Now you're telling me I got to do a coaching certification training, an exam. It's too much. And we actually did a COVID-19 training in our local area here. And I tell you what, people were so tired of being locked down. They wanted to coach and have their children play. So those coaches showed up and we gave an online coaching test with a Google form. And I think it went real well. But again, it's a challenge. Unless it's a money-making entity, it's hard to make volunteers go through all that training. I'm a big proponent of, at minimum, safety training, and ideally you get the rules training and then practice planning training integrated as well.
I'm with you with understanding that. I'm just going to give you a little background on, I probably, and I'm going to throw a big number up because I've probably done at the volunteer level easily over 500 coaching classes for volunteers. Wow. Because I'm a lot older than you are, man. When you get my age, you're going to say the same thing I've been around a long time. So I've done a lot of them and I've had the similar excuses, which are good excuses, no doubt about it. And I want to address that because here's what happened in a lot of areas that I dealt with. My response to them was, I get it. I understand it's going to be tough. So maybe you offer a couple classes. Now we have the advantage of online, which we didn't have back then. And my thing was, okay, what's better? To have a coach that doesn't know anything, that's really detrimental to the player, because if that's the case, let them play on their own because the kid's going to do a lot better job playing the games on their own. Just have a parent there supervising just to make sure nobody gets hurt. but let the players play on their own if you don't have enough coaches. Because here's what we found. When we made the coaches course mandatory for volunteers and we offered 2 or 3 options to be there, they were there. The ones that didn't want to be there, you don't want them anyways, because they think they know it all. And they're the ones who are going to, that don't, and then on top of it, the ones that did know, here's what we found. The ones that didn't think they knew it all, that showed up, really understood they knew very little because they don't do it for a living. It's not their profession. So, and that's the challenge in those courses. So I guess the bounce back a little bit, what I bounced back with the league presidents is I explained to them, listen, you just have to have the courage to take a step forward, because here's the next part I'm going to tell you as a league president. Your first responsibility as league president in a youth league program is to make sure you have enough coaches. One way to do that is to have an educational program, because if I go to a parent and say, listen, we don't need you to be a head coach, be an assistant. Here's the material to help you, because that's what soccer did. Now it's a little easier in soccer. That's what soccer did when they came here. They offered that material because now the parent says, well, you know what? I don't know much about baseball, but now you're handing me some information that can help me set up a practice, how to run a practice, how to do certain things. Now you can go and say, you can get other people who maybe would not volunteer. Now you might get extra volunteers. So that's the way I would look at it, and then work from there. But again, I know it's long-winded, but I think it's good for people to hear that those are proven ways that actually help, because we saw an increase in leagues and volunteers when we did that. The scary part was exactly what you said. Do I take that jump and now make it mandatory for all those parents to be there one way or another, or forget it, don't coach, because we need people that really want to coach?
Yeah, and I've tried to, in my communications with USA Baseball, and I think I spoke to you about this last summer, I consulted a little with Rick Abono of USA Baseball and the Play Smart initiative. I was trying to build in incentives for these coaches. So maybe they send an MLB player to the community, or maybe they give tickets away. And the coaches that get involved in the training, in this certification process, do get these perks. And then they get to have those players maybe come to a practice and help teach. Or maybe they get tickets to the local Yankee or Mets game in my area. So I believe there's ways for that Play Smart initiative, especially with online point systems and stuff, where coaches go on and they use the practice plans and they accumulate points by showing they've read the rules and built in things into their practice plans. Maybe they can give them things that they would want, even if it's just gear and clothing and equipment.
Absolutely. And again, shout out to USA Baseball, because one of the criticisms in the past in general was, if you're a volunteer, we should be helping volunteers, not taking advantage of them. And one way to help, and again, I'm addressing the volunteer coach in the in-house level. I'm not talking about travel teams. One way to help them is to supply them with the information. And that's exactly what USA Baseball is doing, is supplying them with the courses, the information online. They can study on their own too. So I think that's great. I want to jump to another aspect, because you mentioned, we talked about fear, but fear is also an area where kids have a hard time. I think everybody has a hard time dealing with the game, because you're going to strike, you're going to make more outs than you are going to, get on base sometimes. And you're not going to be so successful at pitching all the time. What are some of the things you deal with young kids, how to help them overcome those fears of failure in the actual games?
Right. So baseball is a game of failure. If you're successful 3 times out of 10, you're a Hall of Famer, right? So what I tell my guys is,
did you invent that? I want to know. Were you the first one to say that?
No, I'm going to copyright that and sell that to you, Pete, for the Caliendo Sports. But bottom line is, if a free throw shooter in the NBA made 3 out of 10, right, he'd be laughed out of there. If NFL quarterback was successful 3 out of 10 throws, he wouldn't be playing very much. So I think it's important for players to realize that it's a game of failure, and you don't need to get a hit every at bat. You don't need to throw a strike every pitch as a pitcher. And that's built into it. And it's tough for some kids. They go home wearing the collar 0 for 3 with, a walk, or 0 for 3 with 3 strikeouts and no walk. They didn't even get to touch the base with their foot. That can be really psychologically damaging to a young kid. And that's where coaches have to come in and breathe positivity. And I do think fear of failure becomes a factor in all facets of life, but especially if there's a overbearing parent that's kind of staring down at them, and they get back in the car. Hey, you pulled your head out, you swung at bad pitches. It's really important for the parents to be on the same page as the coaches with this as well, to just be upbeat. And the first question I ask my son when he gets in the car with me and we drive home from a game is, did you have fun? And then I won't just leave it at that, because if he just gives me the yes, I'll say, well, tell me why. What was fun about today? And a lot of times it's the dugout banter. It's when you're warming up and, you're having fun with your teammates. It's not always, well, I hit a line drive to the gap and threw that kid out at first base on that backhand play. A lot of time it's the social components as well. So I think it has to be fun. I think you have to explain that it operates from a premise of failure, and talk about Ted Williams hitting, 350, greatest hitter of all time. And everyone else, if they can get a hit 2.5 times out of 10, then they're, surviving at the MLB level.
And when we talk about success and fun, it seems like, and I've done it, we talk about hitting and pitching all the time. But there's a lot more ways to be successful in a ball game. Even if you struck out 3 times, even if you didn't pitch well. I mean, you got base running, you got defense. Maybe you made a dive and play to save a run. Maybe, I don't know, you turned a double play. I mean, there's so many things that I guess as a coach you can look at during the game to identify those.
Right, that's crucial. We don't want to just commend the kid in the post-game talk who hit the 3-run homer or who threw the, complete game shutout. We want to commend the kid for hustle plays or a heads-up baseball, backing up a play, or being a good teammate. Maybe he ran out and told the runner coming home to get down and slide. Those are the little things, Pete, that make baseball so much fun that, I don't think other sports have this many nuances. And it's important to highlight that so the kid can go home with a good taste in his mouth, even if he did go 0-4.
Absolutely. Darren, what's a way to, kids nowadays, obviously they're on the computer and they love computers, and technology is great. I love it. And then you have to be on top of that technology. What's a way for players or coaches, to teach the kids the game better? So that way they can make decisions on their own, or, decide in games, think ahead, kind of like a coach would do, but we don't expect them to be at that level, but at least learn the game more, because it seems like they're just being robots in a lot of ways. The coaches are controlling everything they do.
Yeah, I think it's important at practice to run drills that would improve their baseball IQ. And you have to ask a lot of questions. Too many coaches just talk at kids, and the kids are sitting there on their one knee, shaking their head. No, you got to ask each kid on the team a question that would maybe educate the whole team. Hey, what could you have done as catcher to prevent that extra base? Hey, what's something we can do as outfielders to help our infielders on pop-ups? So you ask questions. And what I like to do is say, hey, that right-handed batter just hit 2 foul balls down the right field line. What should I do if I'm the shortstop? And then hopefully he'll say, I should shade him over towards the bag. He's not going to hit it in the 6 hole. He's going to hit it more up the middle. So constantly asking questions. And then within the practice format, using something called situations. So I'll put helmets on 3 or 4 of my players, and then I'll put the other 9 out there, and I'll have the pitcher actually throw a pitch to the catcher, and I'll fungo a ball. And the players run out the play. And then I'll hit a gapper with a man on first. And my catcher's got to set up, 4-4-4, double cut. Maybe we'll make a switch. He'll change it to 3 and get the, rear runner at third base. Situations, and doing that kind of defensive work, Pete, especially at the youth level, teaches the kids the game. And telling them, you have to anticipate, if I hit you the ball on the ground, if I hit you the ball in the air, what are you going to do? And that makes them, better ball players from a baseball IQ sense. And I think this is crucial, and not enough travel teams are doing it. After the game, what do we do? Do we just go home? All right, guys, I'll see you tomorrow at 2. We got a game at this field. No, we're going to go to the outfield and we're going to debrief that game. And if it's a rain day, maybe I bring them in and we do some video and we talk about the different field alignments we used. Or maybe we're going to actually do fundamentals and mechanics of each of our players. And you call on the other players to say, hey, what did Johnny do right there? What did he do wrong? It's got to be a group thing. It's got to be a Q&A thing. It can't be a coach dictating. Does it take more time? Yes. Do you sometimes have to plan more as a coach to use Socratic method questions? Absolutely. But they're going to benefit a lot more. And as you know, when I've traveled internationally as one of your coaches, I'm a big Q&A guy on those bus rides.
Yeah, and I can't wait to talk about that also. Here's the other interesting part. During the long-term development of an athlete, especially in the U.S., no matter what, whether we like it or not, it's going to come up. And that is, they're going to attend showcases. They've also got to go through tryouts, from the young levels. Everybody has tryouts. And I think I think there's a place for all this, but I think we're getting a little bit too much of it. But where I think there's a place for tryouts and things like showcases is that first couple experiences when you're young, to kind of go through it, because it's a different experience. Everybody's watching that one person. There's a lot of pressure. If you can deal with it then, it'll help you deal with it when you're older. What's your thoughts on that? And then we'll talk about the showcases in general.
So at our camp, every Thursday, we do a simulated high school pro tryout so that the campers go through a time 60. They go through a pop time. They go through throwing from right field to third base. They go through a full field live BP. So they get a sense of what a showcase tryout or event is all about. And then when they do experience it, whether they're 15, 16, 17 for the first time, they're ready. And I think coaches can do showcase events. When I coached high school ball, twice a year, I would get college coaches to come see me, usually in the fall, and we would do a showcase. One, to get the players ready for it. Two, in some cases, the colleges sign the players. But I think the onus is on the coaches at a practice to go through those activities that occur at a showcase so that they know what metrics are being checked and they can enhance and improve them, and they can even track them themselves.
Straight out question. We got too many showcases. Are kids attending way too many of these? I mean, I know kids that attend 5 to 10, sometimes a year, possibly. Talk about that.
So that's capitalism, Pete. That's companies and people want to make money. And it's parents that you pair that with the parents' desire / in some cases desperation to get their kid enrolled in a college to play baseball, in some cases as a scholarship player. So what do I tell parents? Because I get asked this all the time. One, what is your budget? Set a budget for 10th grade to 12th grade, and then operate from that budget. Two, when you're picking a college, baseball can't be the first priority. You have to figure out geographic location, academic profile. What majors do they offer that your son would maybe focus on? Money has to be a factor. We know that at the college level, the Division I level, 11.7 scholarships are given out for a 28-man roster. So if you are the stud shortstop, you might get a full ride, but most guys are getting 20%, 30%. And if you're talking about a school that costs $60,000, 30% scholarship is only 18 grand. So doing quick math in my head, Pete, that's $42,000 that the parents are on the hook for. So you better make sure the financials match up well too. Now, some kids get academic money, which is something that your listeners should be aware of. It's a combination athletic, academic money, hopefully, that a baseball player will get. So these are questions. And the size of the school, is my son going to be comfortable in a school with 20,000 kids, or is he more comfortable in a smaller environment with only 2,800 students in the student body? So I think these are things we have to hammer out before we just say, oh, he's got to play college baseball, because so often injuries occur, kids get burnt out, things don't work out, and next thing you know, by sophomore, junior year, the kid's not playing baseball, and now it's what's he majoring in? Does he like the social scene there? Is he comfortable with the geography of the place? So too often parents overlook that. I think it's important for players to go to showcases at the school where they may want to attend. So if they want to go to a small school like Union College in New York, just naming a school in New York, or in your area, they want to go to University of Chicago, a great academic D3, go to the showcase that school's having, or maybe the neighboring school's having, and you communicate with the coach and you know he's going to be in attendance there. To go to one of these gigantic showcases where they guarantee that X number of coaches will be there, but that may not be in your target market, it could be a complete waste of time. Now, obviously, the premier business is perfect game, and they'll put your data and statistics on. If you're a tight player, that might make financial sense. And to have video on there of you performing, and they rate you, and colleges put a lot of stake in what perfect game and some showcases post in terms of data. But a lot of these ones are money makers, and the parents are aware of that.
Yeah, I love it. I think you brought up some great points. My other concern is sometimes we're giving away things too early. And what I mean by that is I've seen tournaments where a 10-year-old team wins a tournament, they get a ring, like something like this. Or their uniforms are top of the line. They don't earn anything. I mean, they just get it just to get it.
Yeah.
And then you hear terms. And again, I'm not being critical. I'm being more constructive, because I think at the beginning of the show, I said long-term baseball development. I look at the Japanese again. You got to earn things. You just don't get them. I mean, I'm looking at, you're on the elite team. You're on the premier team. What's the elite team mean? I'm an elite team at 10 years old. Are parents falling for this stuff? I mean, elite, doesn't mean that you're an elite player, but it sure sounds like that.
So now you're talking about the participation trophy culture that we live in, Pete. And it didn't always exist. And it exists now. Why? Again, it comes back to capitalism and money. First, it was the different sports competing with each other. If soccer's giving out a trophy at age 4, well, then karate, swimming, and baseball better give out those trophies. Otherwise, more 4-year-olds are going to stick with that sport over karate, baseball, and swimming, right?
Mm-hmm.
So then every sport gave it out. And then now, yes, if I'm on travel team A, I get a beautiful bat bag and hitting jersey and fitted hat and everything else, matching cleats. So I might choose travel team A over travel team B because the gear is nicer. So sadly, that's the world we're in. We know we are a child-centered culture. And if Johnny says, Mom, I want to play for team A, they have great gear. Guess what? Very often mom and or dad are going to capitulate. So it's about marketing, Pete. I wish I could be more optimistic about that, but a lot of times it's about marketing, and these businesses and even these local sports leagues knowing we've got to give out trophies, we got to give out nice gear if we don't want to lose the kids.
And folks, don't get me wrong, I'm all for marketing, and I'm all for capitalism. I should have named the show Capitalism and Money or something instead of long-term baseball development. But Caliendo Sports, we're going to talk about it in a minute, but I take teams around the world. It's not cheap. It's expensive. I have no problem with capitalism as long as you're supplying the right service. And when you don't have long-term development in mind, I'm not sure you're supplying the right service. And we can talk about that as we get into Caliendo Sports. But one of the things I wanted to ask you was, a lot of these kids do go to these tryouts and all the showcases. What's your advice to these kids? Because a lot of them really don't know what to expect. And if they do, they're not prepared for it. What's your advice to them to try to help them deal with some of these showcases and tryouts?
So there's a lot of downtime at these showcases. So be ready to sit for a while. There might be a lot of players there. And don't get tight. Also, when they call your number, they'll give you a number. You'll be wearing it like a marathon penny on your chest or back. Be ready to step up. Don't be like sitting there staring at your cell phone, scrolling through Instagram. You better be ready to go. I leave the cell phone in the car and hustle. If you're in right field and it's your turn to step up and field the ball and throw it to third base, sprint out to right field. Likewise, if you're a pitcher and they're like, hey, it's your turn to throw your pen on the mound, sprint to the mound. Every college coach wants to be around a kid who hustles, shows enthusiasm, and is passionate for what he's doing. It may not look cool with the other kids that are there, like, wow, what's he doing? Why is he sprinting? Why is he making eye contact with the coach every time he speaks? Why is he nodding his head? Well, guess what? If I'm deciding between two candidates, one who I think can pay attention and pass his classes, who can pay attention and execute things that I'm asking him to do as a player in my program, I'm going to go for that kid. So don't worry about what others think about you. Hustle, be ready for a lot of downtime and stay loose and relaxed while you're waiting.
Darren, as we get into Caliendo sports, we're going to end it here, talk a little bit about the trips. But before we do, if you were commissioner of baseball at the young levels, whether it's in-house, travel ball mostly, not high school, college, but the younger levels, what would some rules or things that you would implement, some changes you would make to benefit the long-term development of these young players? And you had total control. You know, whatever you said had to be done nationwide.
Well, I haven't had total control of anything in my life, Pete, that I can think of. But now that you're giving me the reins, you're giving me the keys to the store.
Hey, that's right. You know, remember, this is like the Sopranos. I'm in charge. I'm giving you the keys. You can do whatever you want.
So I'm just going to rattle off a bunch of stuff. We already spoke about coaches' certification training. They should take a test. That's crucial, especially within the world of safety. So that's number one. Number two, I think the players should learn how to fix the field, rake it, fill in holes both in the batter's box and on the pitcher's mound. Let them care for their field. Then they'll take pride and ownership in that field. Three, fundamentals have to be the focus. Every practice can't be just getting reps. It's got to be about teaching the game. Ideally, you're implementing video and other technology to make it more beneficial for the players. And then what I would also add to that equation is fun. You've got to integrate fun competitions and activities to make the kids want to come back to baseball. And that would mean not a lot of standing around. Things I mentioned before, a coach with an iPad in the dugout, another coach throwing or hitting balls in between pitches to keep all the players on the field active. So there's a lot of ways to make baseball high energy, fun, competitive, and safe. And as commissioner, I would certainly take charge of that.
Well, I anoint you as commissioner. There you go. Take charge and run with it now. All right, listen, before I was going to get into Caliendo sports, but I got to ask you this one because I did a survey on Twitter. It wasn't a big survey, probably 100 people answered it. But it was about the extra inning rule with the man on second, Major League Baseball. We instituted it in the 2008 Olympics at the highest level at that time. I know they've had it at other young levels and all that. But 42% of the recipients were actually all baseball people, do not like it, which I'm amazed because I listened to a lot of Major League people who didn't like it initially, love it now. What's your thoughts?
So I'm going to beat you by 10 years. In 1998, when we started our baseball camp in New Rochelle, New York, we instituted a California rules. If the game went extra innings and the parents were coming soon to pick their kids up, we would put a man on second base and go that route. So I love it from a strategic / interesting standpoint, but those traditionalists out there who like baseball for the way it's been for the last 150 years, they're not going to like it. And, you've got the statistical issues too, because if there's a man on second and that's no one's inherited runner, and then they intentionally walk the next guy to set up the double play or the force at third, yada, 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 you're looking at statistical adjustments. Whose run is that when that man on first comes around to score? An ERA being impacted. So I think it's fun. I think it adds a new element, but there's going to be that 42% who doesn't like messing with baseball tradition. But I've been doing it for 22 years, Pete, at our summer program. So I'm a big fan of it, especially to speed things up.
And I'm just going to say it on the show. I think it's here to stay. I think you're going to see it in the big leagues next year. But we'll see, right?
Well, they're doing anything to spice it up. I mean, right now with the new COVID guidelines, they're trying to save arms and prevent injury and get through the 60-game schedule. But in general, forgetting Corona times, they are trying to make baseball more fun, action-packed, and add some life to it. And I think you're going to see a lot of these adaptations. I know the Northern League, which is a non-affiliated league, they started things where the batter can steal first base. If he strikes out, even with no strikes on him, he can run to first base. So drop first, second, and third strike.
Yeah, I think we can go a little too far when it comes to that. Maybe we need to concentrate on teaching the skills and teaching more how to, steal bases and hit and run and bunt and run, bunt and steal. There's so many things, so many weapons you can use offensively that I think we just don't use it at the younger levels. And one of the things, and I guess since we're on it real quick here, that at the higher levels they're not doing as much. So now at the young levels, guess what's happening? Some coaches aren't bunting anymore. Some coaches aren't even hitting running. I mean, and it's crazy because you can't say, first of all, you're taking away the fun of the game and the strategy behind it. And part of the game is winning, but you can't say that kid's going to make it into the big league. So what are you worried about what they're doing at the big league level for? When in college they bunt, high school they bunt. Talk to our audience about that. What do you guys do when it comes to college baseball?
So bunting is one of the most exciting parts of the game. You get a pitcher on the mound in later innings. He's tight. He's worried about blowing a 6-5 lead. He walks the first batter. You have a bunt. He runs, picks it up, throws it into right field. Now you got second and third, no outs, puts a lot of pressure on the defense. And hey, how many of your hitters, we talk about launch angle, exit velocity. How many of your hitters in your 1 through 9 actually should even care about launch angle and exit velo? They should be worried about just putting the ball in play. And bunting is a big part of that. Bunting for a hit. And, with 2 strikes, choking up, hitting the ball to the right side, moving a runner over. There's not enough of that, Pete. And using base running strategy to scrap for runs via small ball. There's too much of relying on the 3-run homer because that's what the MLB is doing. We have an all or nothing culture in our country, Pete, where it's a lot of strikeouts and a lot of home runs, and no one's doing the little things. And that has filtered into baseball, unfortunately.
And finally, we're going to get to it. Caliendo Sports International, a capitalist business. And I want to address it because it's interesting. As a coach, you've been on several trips, so I want you to talk about it and what your good things are, and what possibly what some things that were not so good, because I think that's important to be constructive and to learn from it. But one of the things I will tell you this, I can tell you many times. Because the trips are expensive. I don't know how many times I have told parents, listen, if you got to put it on a credit card, don't do it. If you can't raise the money, if you can't afford it and you can't raise the money, wait till you can afford it. So you talk about, what's right and what's wrong. That cost me pocketbook wise. There's been times trip wise where I didn't have enough players possibly. As long as I had enough, to go and maybe only had 8 players, financially may have not done great, but we went. And the experiences were awesome. So I want you to talk about your experience as a coach on some of the Caliendo sports trips that you've been around the world.
So one thing I would improve is I would triple my stipend.
Yes.
The other coaches, you don't have to do anything with their stipends, but Coach Gurney's stipend should be tripled. Pete, there's nothing like representing your country, wearing that USA across your chest. There's nothing like it. And it's important for parents to say, you know what, it's not all about college showcases and getting my son ready to play college baseball by sending him to this travel team or this showcase. What about going on a culturally diverse trip where you see how other cultures live and play baseball? And for the player, it's really important because it gives them a taste of college and pro baseball, because you have these long bus trips where you're riding on a bus in some cases for 3 to 5 hours, and the coach is forcing you to pay attention and make eye contact and learn about the game and learn about how to behave as an athlete. And that gives the players a sense of their future. The other piece that's so much fun is seeing how these other countries play and train for baseball. I mean, we were in Japan, and I'm in the Tokyo Dome, and they're going double barrel with the batting practice. They got 2 turtles. They got a lefty BP thrower behind an L screen and a righty. While that's going on, so we got double the amount of hitters hitting. On the first and third baseline, you got pitchers doing PFPs, fielding bunts, covering first. So you learn so much about how other countries train for the game. We're in the Dominican Republic. I'm watching their long toss program. Really interesting, very different than what we do here. And then in Italy, the coach gets greeted with a nice draft beer and some pizza after the game, something that I'm hoping we can bring to the college baseball level for me. So that's fascinating. And then, of course, baseball is the ultimate metaphor for life, Pete. So you learn through the game about life, how to treat one another. And the players on our rosters, they're from all over the United States. So a player from Chicago is interacting with a player from Baltimore, or is interacting with a player from Nashville, Tennessee, and they're deprived of a lot of their creature comforts, meaning they don't have that refrigerator to go downstairs to. They don't have mommy and daddy always, to bring them their Gatorade in the dugout. So they're on their own. They learn independence. And I got to tell you, as a parent, that is priceless. And then, of course, the coaches, you get a handsome devil like me coaching at a very high, all joking aside, your coaching staff, you got Reggie Smith, longtime all-star at the MLB level. You got phenomenal high school coaches. You've got coaches like myself who can provide the college perspective and educate the players about, hey, how do I get, signed up with college baseball? What's the process like? They're going to get all of that. And Pete, not to toot your horn too much, but it's a well-organized machine. Rarely was a bus late. Rarely was a dinner not at 6:30 if it was on a 6:30 itinerary. So your staff, your diplomats, if you will, in these overseas countries, I thought were phenomenal. And, you've got a great resume of players that have played for you through your international travel that are now college and professional baseball players. So there's a lot of selling points to it. As I said, the only change I would make would be, really increasing my stipend.
No problem. It just went up a penny. So that's good. And, you mentioned, because this is important to us folks, just so you know, the most important aspect of the trip for Caliendo Sports is our coaching staff. That's the number one thing we want to make sure we do really well. And that's pick great coaches, because they're with you the whole trip. And there's so much education, not just off the field, on the field, all the time. And you get to be with them because we're together the whole time. From the time you arrive, the time you leave that country, we're together all the time. Now, some trips we're in several hotels, and I love that part because you're kind of learning what pro ball is like, getting off the bus, getting your bags, or even high school, college ball on a spring trip. And kids have to do their own things. Even though parents are around, they're still responsible for their gear. They're responsible for certain things. The other thing, Darren, I like about the trip, because we get this question all the time, and that is, do you guys practice before? Well, obviously, if we practice before, it costs even more money because we have to meet somewhere for 2-3 days because kids are coming from all over. But I love the aspect that we don't practice. Maybe we practice the day we get there for just one time, and then kids have to play games on their own. They have to make decisions. They have to communicate with the other guys on the team. They've got to actually do something, and the coaches are there to guide them, but they've got to play the game. And I love that part. And on top of it, a lot of times we split up and we mix the players up with the Japanese players and Dominican players. So I like experience too.
Yeah, I think it's good anytime you take an athlete out of his comfort zone in any sport. A lot of training now, and if you look at the Florida Baseball Ranch and Driveline, a lot of these places are having players train with instability and variation. And what better variation than playing overseas where you don't have a lot of the equipment and training tools that you're used to having, and you're playing with players you don't know, and you got to communicate, and you're working with coaches that have never coached you before, and you got to learn new signals, and it's all happens pretty darn quickly, and you're eating different foods, and you're hearing different music. Hey, you're taking me out of my comfort zone. I'm going to grow both as a player and as a person. And you want to talk about being a good preparation for college. What is college all about? Getting adjusted to a new environment, both academically and athletically. So, I can sing the praises of the trips all night and day, Pete.
Love it. Well said. And by the way, you mentioned you had parent meetings, to kind of educate them how to act the games. Just show them the parents in Japan. Show them a video of that. And they're the best fans in the world, man. They know exactly how to, they clap all the time. They clap sometimes even for the other team when they see a great play, right? They're cheering all the time. They're just having fun. They're not yelling at anybody, or they're not trying to teach anybody anything. So I think that's another area. Darren, this is awesome. It's been great, man. Kept you on long. I really appreciate it. Last words. Go ahead. They're yours.
Yeah, learn about other cultures. You mentioned the Japanese. I was fortunate to coach at a Japanese boarding school for 8 years, and I created so many bonds. Even during the lockdown, I've been in touch with so many of my former players. And if you can learn from others and step out of your comfort zone, as I mentioned, your training facility, they're going to do things a cookie cutter blueprint way a lot of times. try to learn other ways. And that might be from players at different parts of the country or different parts of the world. Don't think there's only one way to skin a cat. There might be multiple ways. And don't think because your travel coach says to slide one way and your high school coach says to slide another way, one guy is right and one guy is wrong. Hopefully there'll be some uniformity. But my point is, be open-minded to learn from other people and different techniques.
Great advice. Love it. And folks, just so you know, Caliendo Sports International is going to Cuba at Christmas break. If you're interested, we're putting the roster now together. That's 15U. And when I say 15U, if you're 14, can play with the 15s, you're good. Even if you're 13 and you can play with the 15, it's all about ability. Some kids, remember, biologically are older, so you can have a 13-year-old that's actually better. I've seen 13-year-olds that are better than some 14s and some 15s. So we're talking about the ability level. So communicate with us. We're taking that team to Cuba. In the summer, we'll be going Cuba, Japan, Italy, a lot of other countries. Email me if you're interested, caliendo19@gmail.com. All right, Mr. Gurney, this is the end, man. Appreciate it. God bless you, and thanks for being on here, man.
Pete, great seeing you. Hopefully I'll see you this coming summer, either in Japan and or Cuba.
Absolutely. Can't wait, man. All right, folks. That's Darren Gurney. I'm Pete Caliendo. Special thanks to Brian Kroc, our producer with the Lineup Media Group. Special thanks to Coach Gurney. And also special thanks to everybody in the U.S. and around the world for joining the show. Don't forget, just go to YouTube, subscribe. That's all we ask. And then the audio is going to be on our podcast, baseballoutsidethebox.com. I'm your host, Pete Caliendo. Thanks for joining us today, and we'll see you on tomorrow's show.